Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, November 8th, 2024. Republican U.S. Senate candidate Dave McCormick gives a victory speech in Pittsburgh after his race was called by Associated Press in his favor. But the person he beat, incumbent Democratic Senator Bob Casey, has not conceded, saying there is a chance the votes yet to be counted could overcome the current very narrow vote deficit. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, now former Democratic vice presidential nominee, along with the First Lady of Minnesota, Gwen Walz, speak in Eagan, Minnesota, about losing the presidential election to the Republican ticket and the path forward. We will talk with Associated Press national political reporter Meg Kinnard about President-elect Donald Trump's choice for White House Chief of Staff, his campaign manager, Susie Wiles. U.S. and European leaders are condemning anti-Semitic clashes in Amsterdam overnight after a soccer match that included a team from Tel Aviv. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered his country's Mossad spy agency to prepare for possible violence at sporting events in the future. And Great Britain has a new Conservative Party leader, Kemi Badenoch. We'll talk with C-SPAN's Westminster producer in London, Peter Knowles, about her first week leading the opposition in the British government. A story from TheHill.com. Pennsylvania Republican Senate candidate David McCormick filed 2 lawsuits challenging provisional ballots in Philadelphia, signaling he is prepared to take his fight to the Supreme Court. McCormick declared victory after the Associated Press projected Thursday that he beat incumbent Senator Bob Casey, Democrat, in the key race. Decision Desk HQ, the Hill's election data partner, has not yet called the race. McCormick's lawyers said Philadelphia plans to adjudicate between 15,000 and 20,000 provisional ballots, and that his campaign intends to challenge large groups of them for not complying with statutory requirements. Decision Desk HQ reports McCormick leads Casey by 0.5 percentage points, the edge of the threshold that triggers an automatic recount. Casey's campaign has not conceded and said Thursday that the count in Pennsylvania is still continuing. That was from The Hill. Today, Dave McCormick spoke in Pittsburgh, declaring victory.
I also want to express my gratitude to Senator Casey. So the Casey family has served this great Commonwealth for more than 50 years. My dad worked for Governor Casey, Senator Casey's father. We obviously had an incredibly hard-fought race, but there's no doubt that this is a family, and this is, in Senator Casey, a man who has served this great Commonwealth with honor. And so while we need to move forward on the people's business, which is what I'm doing today, I also recognize what it's like to lose a close election. I lost an election by 900 points. So, we knew on election night we had won because the math was clear, and there's no way for Senator Casey to win. And the AP certainly recognized that yesterday by calling the race. But Senator Casey is going to have to work through this. And so I wish him the best and his family the best, and thank them for their service. But we got to move on to changing the direction of the country. And this is an incredibly important week, right? So we have leadership elections in Washington for the leadership of the Senate. Dean and I had a talk with President Trump yesterday. There's a huge agenda that he's putting forward. And we made 500 stops across our Commonwealth this calendar year. Dairy farms, manufacturing facilities, VFWs, law enforcement stations. We've met with people across our great Commonwealth. We put 100,000 miles on that big old bus, which we're keeping, by the way. Dina doesn't know that bus is staying with the program. And what an honor it was, and what an inspiration it was to meet so many Pennsylvanians fighting for their families, fighting to make America great, fighting to make Pennsylvania great. But we heard a common refrain. The one message we heard over and over again is we need change. The country is headed in the wrong direction. We need leadership to get our economy back on track, to get this horrific inflation under control. We need leadership to secure the border, to stop this scourge of fentanyl. The most heartbreaking thing we encountered were parents along the way that had lost a child to fentanyl. We need leadership to bring law and order to our communities, because you can't have healthy families and healthy businesses without law and order. We learned time and again that the path to unlocking Pennsylvania's Pennsylvania's future is energy. We are uniquely blessed, and we need to have regulations and get rid of red tape and streamline the permitting process and embrace the power of not just natural gas, but all forms of energy to make sure Pennsylvania not only becomes the most dynamic economy in our great country, but also creates these great paying jobs for every single Pennsylvanian. So there's a mandate for change. And so that's where my attention starts today.
Dave McCormick, Pennsylvania U.S. Senate Republican nominee, declaring victory today in Pittsburgh. That close loss that he referred to was in 2022. He lost the Republican U.S. Senate primary to Dr. Mehmet Oz. WHYY Philadelphia PBS reports Maddie McDaniel, spokesperson for Bob Casey for Senate, that's the Democratic incumbent running for a fourth term, issued a statement saying that provisional ballots expected from areas that favor Senator Casey, like Philadelphia and its suburbs, is further proof that this race is too close to be called. As the McCormack campaign admitted in their own lawsuit, the statement goes on this morning, the counting of these ballots could have an impact on the outcome of the election. With more than 100,000 ballots still left to count, we will continue to make sure Pennsylvanians' voices are heard. CSPAN.org's Campaign 2024 page shows that the Associated Press tally in the Senate is 53 Republicans and 45 Democrats, which includes 2 independents that plan to caucus with them, and 2 Senate races uncalled, Nevada and Arizona. And over in the House, still no clear majority party. Currently 211 Republican seats, 199 Democratic seats, and 25 uncalled. 218 is needed for a majority. As for the presidential election, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, the Republicans, are the winners. But the tally of the Electoral College votes is still not complete, with Nevada and Arizona still outstanding. Currently, it's 295 votes for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, 226 votes for the Democrats, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. And Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, the former Democratic vice presidential nominee, returned home to resume his governor's duties full-time. Today, he spoke about the election in Eagan, Minnesota. He was introduced by his wife, the First Lady of Minnesota, Gwen Walz.
We have a responsibility to keep this haven, this special place, Minnesota, safe and inclusive and strong. Because our neighbors, they are counting on us. So let's take everything we're feeling, our fear, our fatigue, our frustration, and let us use it as our fuel. Yes, we have got to dig in, and not only dig in, we have got to dig deep. And we have to be steadfast and stubborn. And it is going to take all of us. That's right. But we cannot and we will not give up this fight. I'm not sure if you heard me. We cannot and we will not give up this fight. That's right, come on! Come on! That's right, we cannot and we will not give up this fight!
Gwen Walz, the First Lady of Minnesota, today in Eagan, Minnesota, introducing her husband, the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, former Democratic vice presidential nominee.
I know there's a lot of folks that are worried about the next 4 years and what they're going to look like. I'm one of them. The agenda we heard from the other side in this campaign was very different from the one we know is right for our state and our country. We've already seen the damage a president can cause when he's in it for himself, not the American people. Look, we know what's coming down the pike. We know it because they told us. And we're going to have to be ready to defend the progress that we've made here in Minnesota. The other side spent a lot of time campaigning and talking about and promising that they would leave things up to the states. Well, I'm willing to take them at their word for that. But the moment they try and bring a hateful agenda in this state, I'm going to stand ready to stand up and fight for the way we do things here. Look, Minnesota always has and always will be there to provide shelter from the storm.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, former Democratic vice presidential nominee, today in Eagan, Minnesota. He went on to talk about specific issues he said he would protect: abortion rights, union rights, immigration, gun safety, not demonizing the other side. And then he spoke directly to those who did not vote for him.
About 1.5 million of our fellow Minnesotans voted for the other side in this election. And while there might not be a place in our state for the most extreme elements of that agenda, there should be a place in our politics for everyone to be heard. I think sometimes we can be quick to judge people who don't agree with us, to assume that they act out of cruelty or fear or self-interest. I don't think that kind of judgment is helpful right now, and I don't think it's right. I think we ought to swallow, and this is me in this as I'm speaking about myself, swallow a little bit of pride and look a little harder to find common ground with our neighbors who didn't vote like we did in this election. Maybe we won't agree on every issue. Hell, maybe we won't agree on any issue. But maybe when the campaign signs come down, we all get a little break from the rhetoric and the TV ads and the fundraising texts, and I'm sorry about those. Maybe when we get a little break from this campaign that we're in, we'll be able to look at each other and see not enemies but neighbors. And maybe we'll be able to sit down over coffee or a Diet Mountain Dew and just talk. Talk about our kids. Talk about the lives we want to build for them. Talk about the things that really matter, how we treat each other, how we look out for each other, and how we support each other in difficult times. For my part, I'm going to try even harder to do that as governor. Nobody, not the DFLers, not Republicans, nobody has a monopoly on good intentions or good ideas. And now that this election is behind us, I'm going to try even harder to keep an open mind, open heart, and really listen to folks who don't support me or my policies, to work with everyone in the legislature to seek compromise and common ground. Because that's how we come back together after such a long time spent fighting each other.
Governor Tim Walz, Democrat of Minnesota, former Democratic vice presidential nominee, today in Eagan, Minnesota. His current term runs another 2 years. Story from Newsweek. The so-called Nostradamus of U.S. elections has admitted he was wrong after former and now future President Donald Trump won the 2024 contest, despite his prediction that Vice President Kamala Harris would emerge victorious. Historian Alan Lichtman's model, The Keys to the White House, had correctly predicted the outcome of 9 out of 10 of the presidential elections prior to this year, earning him the comparison to the 16th century French reputed seer. The model hinges on 13 keys, all true-false statements that evaluate the standing of the incumbent parties based on factors including the economy, foreign policy, and domestic politics. If 6 or more are false, the incumbent party is predicted to lose the election. If 5 or fewer are false, it's expected to win. And that was reporting from Newsweek. Alan Lichtman was interviewed by CNN Thursday night.
I think the fundamental problem was the keys, not my interpretation. No one's convinced me that was wrong. There are unique features. I've always said, some unique features could break the patterns of history, and I think that's happened here. First of all, a unique feature specific to this election. And you've heard me say this before. I was very critical of the Democrats for openly and viciously trashing their sitting president right out in public. I have never seen that before, and I've studied politics since the founding, and we saw Biden's approval rating plummet as they were doing that. I think that extended beyond Biden to weaken any Democratic candidates since they're discrediting their own administration. Secondly, it rendered problematic one of my keys, the contest key, since we couldn't have a primary, but the Democrats did unite around Harris, and I turned the key in their favor, but we had never seen anything like that before, and that was problematic. But more importantly, are trends that are long-term and affect the long-term future of our democracy and the keys, because the keys depend upon a rational, pragmatic electorate deciding based on governance whether the incumbent party should get 4 more years. And we've seen the explosion of some trends that have existed before, but not to this extent. Disinformation. You know, Elon Musk is, I don't know how many hundreds of billions he has. He has been the director of misinformation. 2 billion views of his spreading of disinformation, not just about the economy, but about immigrants, about minorities. We've never seen disinformation at this scale. Next, we have never seen to this scale the agitation of 3 trends that have been very deeply embedded in American history: misogyny, racism, and xenophobia. You know, the first anti-immigrant law was 1798, and Donald Trump wants to revive it. You know, first it was the French, then the Germans, then the Jews, then the Mexicans, then the Muslims. There's always another. And of course, you know, racism. We didn't even begin to dismantle Jim Crow until the 1960s, and it's still to some extent survived. Women didn't vote until 1920. So that calls into question the whole premise behind the keys and behind our democracy.
Historian Alan Lichtman interviewed on CNN Thursday night, admitting he got the prediction wrong on this year's presidential race. A couple of articles from Associated Press on President-elect Donald Trump. One is the judge overseeing Trump's 2020 election interference case canceled any remaining court deadlines Friday after prosecutors said they need time to assess the appropriate course going forward. After the Republicans' presidential victory this week, Special Counsel Jack Smith charged Trump last year with plotting to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election and illegally hoarding classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago estate. But Smith's team has been evaluating how to wind down the 2 federal cases before the president-elect takes office in light of longstanding Justice Department policy that says sitting presidents cannot be prosecuted. A person familiar with the matter told the Associated Press. And the other AP article, the Justice Department unsealed criminal charges Friday in a thwarted Iranian plot to kill President-elect Donald Trump before this week's presidential election. Criminal complaint filed in federal court in Manhattan alleges that an unnamed official in Iran's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard instructed a contact this past September to put together a plan to surveil and ultimately kill Trump. That was from Associated Press. President-elect Donald Trump announced Thursday night that his campaign manager, Susie Wiles, would be his chief of staff when he enters the White House. Coming up in a moment, we'll talk with a reporter about this choice. Donald Trump thanked her and campaign co-manager Chris LaCivita in his early morning Wednesday victory speech in Florida.
Let me also express my tremendous appreciation for Susie and Chris, the job you did. Susie, come here. Come here, Susie. Chris, come here, Chris. Susie likes to stay sort of in the back, let me tell you. The ice maiden, we call her the ice maiden. Come here, Chris. Come here, Chris. Susie likes to stay in the background. She's not in the background. Come here, Susie.
Joining us now to talk about President-elect Donald Trump's incoming White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, is Meg Kinnard, national politics reporter with the Associated Press. Thanks for being with us. Who is Susie Wiles, and what will she bring to the job?
Hey, it's really good to be with you. Susie Wiles is somebody who has a lot of experience in politics, but hasn't been that out front person that would be immediately recognizable, even to people who followed the Trump campaign really closely. She's been involved in politics for decades, particularly in Florida, but for this whole campaign cycle, she has been part of Donald Trump's machinations. She got on board with his 2024 campaign very early on, even when a lot of other Republicans were very skeptical as to whether he could really make this comeback. And she has served as co-chair of this campaign. She's been largely, though, behind the scenes, kind of running things and writing memos and doing big, broad strategy, but not really out front, certainly not talking to reporters like me along the trail, and even kind of shying away from the spotlight when Donald Trump has tried to give her kudos from the stage, as he did during his acceptance early Wednesday morning.
You write at apnews.com, your article Wiles was able to help control Donald Trump's worst impulses. What kind of relationship do they have?
It seems that they do have a good relationship. I mean, let's keep in mind that there, at least when we think back to Donald Trump's first campaign in the 2016 cycle, there was a lot of churn, particularly at the top of his campaign management. There were numerous managers. There were numerous people seeming to fall in and out of favor with him. But in this campaign, Susie Wiles has been a constant. There have been several, but she has certainly been one who has maintained that relationship with Donald Trump throughout the entire campaign. And what we have seen and heard from those within this close circle is that she has earned her respect, that she has showed him by way of giving advice and then showing him how that can positively be reflected in gains that he made during this campaign. That's something that he appears to have listened to and respected, and therefore kind of kept that even keel between them. And we saw this, the kind of relationship that when you don't see two people in the same room a lot, as we certainly didn't see them, she was, again, more behind the scenes. But late in the campaign, when Donald Trump was campaigning in Pennsylvania, and he went off the prompter, which he often does, but he gave more of a wide-ranging kind of stream of consciousness sort of speech and got into territory that seemed a little bit off script even for him, talking about he wouldn't mind if reporters encountered violence. And that was one of those first moments where we really saw Susie Wiles come to the forefront, and she came out and kind of gave him this look. And that was, at least for those of us who have been following the Donald Trump campaign for months and years at this point, we were like, wow, she's actually coming forward and we're seeing her. And if she can give him that look and maybe he goes back to talk about something else, then that means that he is listening to her and he is valuing that advice that she's giving him. And so now he's taking that from the campaign trail in the realm of politics directly into the White House and the Oval Office.
We're talking with the Associated Press reporter Meg Kinnard. How difficult or easy is it to move from managing a presidential campaign to running a White House?
Some of the skill sets are similar and some are very different. Again, if Susie Wiles and Donald Trump have this good, respectable working relationship during the campaign, then that is something that does translate, or at least purports to translate well, into a president-chief of staff relationship. The chief of staff, in addition to being the number one hire when a president starts his or her administration, is the closest confidant to the president, is the person who is taking what the president wants to do and trying to make that into reality, working through all the different layers of staff and agency. So those are good skill sets. But for someone like Susie Wiles, who has largely been out of the spotlight and not as much recognizable, at least it's going to be a little bit more exposure for her. The chief of staff in the White House is somebody that is seen to speak at pretty much all times for the president in terms of policy and also agenda setting. And so we will see how she comes into that role. She has been doing politics for years. She has different levels of experience, but this is something that is certainly going to put a little bit more focus on her, particularly in terms of not only just dealing with reporters, but also kind of going through the agency process and spreading out that Trump administration agenda in a very broad way. So that's something that may very well be within her wheelhouse. We just haven't really seen that in terms of her work on the campaign.
You mentioned that she was able to be successful this time as a campaign manager versus the past Donald Trump campaigns. What's been the history of Donald Trump and White House chiefs of staff, and does that history matter in this second term?
When you talk to people within the Trump circle and those who were part of that first administration, they admit that they had a lot to learn when they came into Washington. This wasn't a realm that many of them had operated in very closely, and certainly Donald Trump had not. And so they say that this go around, they know a lot of things that they just didn't know in 2016 leading into 2017. But in that first administration, Donald Trump had not just one, not two or three, but 4 chiefs of staff in 4 years. And that is certainly something that kind of led to a feeling of uncertainty within that administration when you have that very top person rotating in and out, and then even acting in an acting capacity for a whole year. That isn't a lot of continuity. And so it sometimes that kind of made it seem like there may have been different pieces of the administration that were kind of operating on playing from different songbooks. But coming into this, we all four chiefs of staff had the kind of relationship that Susie Wiles and Donald Trump appear to have, that one that's based in respect, obviously a successful track record in this campaign, a campaign that was better run and more smoothly executed than his prior two campaigns, obviously one of which was successful, but the second one not. And so that kind of sets it up to at least seem that there will be more continuity in this White House from that leadership position. Again, this is all speculation. It is forecasting. We still have weeks and weeks to go until we see what this plays out in real time. But at least in this circumstance, Susie Wiles has a different kind of relationship with the incoming president than any of her predecessors did in that role. And so that at least seems to tell us that we may not see that sort of turnover and revolving door, so to speak, of the chiefs of staff of the past.
Meg Kinnard is national politics reporter with the Associated Press. Find her stories at apnews.com and on X at Meg Kinnard AP. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Story from Politico. The Justice Department issued its first official comment on the presidential transition Friday, indicating that officials there are prepared to help incoming advisors to President-elect Donald Trump get access to classified information. The statement said the Department of Justice is committed to ensuring an orderly and effective transition to the new administration. We are prepared to deliver briefings to the transition team on our operations and responsibilities, and we stand ready to process requests for security clearances for those who will need access to national security information. President-elect Donald Trump promised on the campaign trail to increase domestic fossil fuel production. He often referred to oil as liquid gold. Today, Paul DeBar, former Energy Undersecretary for Science in the first Trump administration, now a Columbia University senior research scholar, was part of a discussion at the Hudson Institute in Washington about North American energy policy. An audience member asked him about President-elect Donald Trump's plans.
Hi, I'm not an expert on energy. I manage a social impact private equity real estate fund, so I know the impact of regulation. My question for you is, how important moving forward will the environmentalists be to hindering those that want to drill, baby, drill? My understanding was that the Canadian pipeline was canceled because of that. What do you see in the future in terms of achieving, I guess, the goals for many people in this room to drill? Thank you.
So once again, I kind of come back to my four policy point, right? You got to be thoughtful. But you're thoughtful about production and prices and environment and national security and thinking through that. There are many people who are singularly focused. And of course, there's some people who are singularly focused on environment, where some people are singularly focused in one of the other areas. And so I would argue that better public policy, right, is to think about all of it at the same time. There will absolutely be some people, any place in the world, who focuses on just this or just that. I would argue that there's a lot of data to support that is fragile, right? There's a lot of other data, right, about like why is the U.S. the biggest reducer of emissions? I think a large part of it is natural gas, right? U.S. also is a very large deployer of wind and solar. I'm on the board of Dominion. We're building the largest solar footprint of any of the utilities. And it gets to a very complicated mix about how you trade power, which is a whole topic, which is very complicated. But you have to think about that at all points. Let me give you one example, I think, of the challenges that need to be fixed right away by President Trump's administration coming back. In most power markets in this country, we're shutting down more power plants than we're building. We're de-electrifying. This, once again, this is just data, and you can go power market by power market. And the stuff that we're shutting down runs at 90% availability, and the stuff that we're replacing it with is about 35%. So it's it's worth 1/3 on a megawatt basis. And it's not dispatchable. So those are the three differences. You've seen power prices in PJM, which is where DC is in. The capacity prices a couple months ago went up for next year, 933% year over year. We want to talk about energy price inflation, right? And why is that? That is because the balance is out of whack. We're shutting down a lot. We're de-electrifying in the mid-Atlantic. We're adding stuff that has good environmental characteristics, but is incredibly poor at operating characteristics. So you add all that up together, and people will get mad. People in Europe are mad, right, about energy prices. They're losing their jobs. VW's firing people. So, but you could do it all at the same time. I push back hard on people say, like, you have a trade-off. No. For the majority of the people, you can do all this. People will say, like, I want more of this or I want more of that. But it was done. That previous 4-year period, U.S. deflation, energy production, massive increase, leading the world in emissions reduction, and the world was safer. You can push and pull on any one of those topics, make a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that, but people should be wary to be singularly focused, and anyone telling you should be singularly focused in any of the 4 areas.
Paul DeBar, former Energy Undersecretary for Science in the first Donald Trump administration, now at Columbia University, speaking at the Hudson Institute in Washington, part of a day-long program on North American energy policy. Story from CNN. Hours after former President Donald Trump was declared the winner of the 2024 election, the Biden administration moved Wednesday to limit oil drilling in Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Oil drilling had been banned for decades in the Arctic Refuge, a pristine natural region in northeast Alaska, home to a wide range of threatened species, but a law passed during the first Trump administration required the federal government to hold 2 lease sales there for fossil fuel drilling. The first was in 2021 and was ultimately suspended and canceled by the Interior Department because of the lack of interest from the oil industry. The Trump-era law required the second lease sale to be held before the end of 2024. The Biden administration signaled Wednesday it plans to move forward with a 400,000-acre auction, the lowest acreage it could legally offer. That story from CNN. Wall Street today, the Dow up 259, NASDAQ up 17, S&P up 22. Story from Reuters. Shares of Trump Media and Technology Group gained on Friday after U.S. President-elect Donald Trump said he had no intention of selling his shares in the company, which owns his Truth Social media platform. In a post on Truth Social, Trump rejected what he described as rumors that he was planning to sell shares a day after the stock slumped. He wrote, "There are fake, untrue, and probably illegal rumors and or statements made by perhaps market manipulators or short sellers that I'm interested in selling shares of Truth." That from Reuters. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Visit cspan.org/results for comprehensive coverage of the 2024 campaign results. Get the final Electoral College breakdown in the presidential race and see which states each candidate carried. Dive into our interactive maps to explore the outcomes in Senate, House, and governor's races and monitor the final balance of power in Congress. Plus, watch acceptance and concession speeches on demand, anytime. Stay up to date with C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of politics at cspan.org/results.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you listen to podcasts. Story from The Guardian. Amsterdam police have made more than 60 arrests after what authorities called hateful anti-Semitic violence against Israeli football fans. A plane carrying football supporters brought home from the Dutch capital by the Israeli government landed on Friday at Israel's Ben Gurion Airport after the clashes on Thursday, which took place after a Europa League match between Ajax and Maccabi Tel Aviv. That was from The Guardian. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke in a video statement during a visit to the Foreign Affairs Ministry in Jerusalem to oversee the evacuation of Israelis from Amsterdam. The video was posted by the Israeli government with the Prime Minister speaking in Hebrew. You will hear the English translation via Hudistan Times.
There are other sports games in Europe, basketball, and other events we need to consider. I've instructed the head of the Mossad and other officials to prepare our courses of action, our alertness, and our readiness for a new situation. There is a new yet old situation here. Yes, 86 years ago tomorrow was Kristallnacht, an attack on Jews for simply being Jewish on European soil. It has returned now. Yesterday, it was marked in the streets of Amsterdam. That's what happened. It was a kind of black night. There's only one difference. The Jewish state now exists, and we need to deal with this. I spoke with Dutch Prime Minister Rutte. First thing in the night when I learned of the event, and then we talked to various officials. But I finally reached him in the morning, and I asked him first of all. He said he sees this as a severe anti-Semitic incident. And I say he is right. It's an extremely severe anti-Semitic incident. It's not a brawl between two sides. It's an organized effort to harm Jews, likely initiated by radical anti-Semitic groups. This situation, first and foremost, places us in the free countries and the Netherlands, in danger. It does not only endanger us, it endangers them too. But first, we must address our own threat. We cannot accept this. I demanded strong action. First against those who carried it out, in addition to ensuring our people's safety and facilitating their orderly return to the country. It's also important to protect the Jewish community, and I asked him to do that. He promised to do so. Secondly, it's important to bring those responsible to justice. I am asking you to follow up on this demand in the most thorough manner possible. This does not pass unchallenged. There are cameras, intelligence, and all the necessary resources to prosecute these rioters. This must be a necessary condition. The next step, of course, is to address the new security arrangements in light of the current global situation of attempted attacks against both individual Jews and the collective Jewish community and Israelis. We will issue further instructions accordingly. At this point, I am asking you to take all necessary action to locate the missing and bring Israelis back to the country. Update me as the situation unfolds.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu through an interpreter, a video posted by his office as he was at the Foreign Affairs Ministry in Jerusalem. The Dutch Prime Minister, Dick Schoof, spoke to reporters at a European Nations Summit in Budapest, Hungary.
Let's say that I'm ashamed that this happened in the Netherlands, and it's a terrible anti-Semitic attack. And we will not tolerate, and we will prosecute the perpetrators. And I'm deeply ashamed that it could happen in the Netherlands in 2024.
The Dutch Prime Minister in Hungary. Here in the U.S., bipartisan condemnation of the attacks. Democratic President Joe Biden writing on X, the anti-Semitic attacks on Israeli soccer fans in Amsterdam are despicable and echo dark moments in history when Jews were persecuted. We've been in touch with Israeli and Dutch officials and appreciate Dutch authorities' commitment to holding the perpetrators accountable. We must relentlessly fight anti-Semitism wherever it emerges. And Republican Congressman Ken Calvert of California on X, these despicable and deliberate attacks on Israeli soccer fans in Amsterdam are a deeply troubling escalation in the rise of anti-Semitism we are seeing in Europe, the U.S., and beyond. We must do more to stop and condemn hateful rhetoric and violence against Jews. Great Britain's new opposition leader, Kemi Badenoch, is finishing up her first week on the job after being elected by the Conservative Party membership. Coming up in a moment, we will speak with C-SPAN's Westminster producer Peter Knowles in London. First, Kemi Badenoch gave her victory speech in London November 2nd.
The task that stands before us is tough but simple. Our first responsibility as His Majesty's loyal opposition is to hold this Labour government to account. Our second is no less important. It is to prepare over the course of the next few years for government, to ensure that by the time of the next election, we have not just a clear set of Conservative pledges that appeal to the British people, but a clear plan for how to implement them. A clear plan to change this country by changing the way that government works. The Prime Minister is discovering all too late the perils of not having such a plan. That huge job begins today. Yeah.
The new British Conservative Party leader, Kemi Badenoch, in London after she was elected November 2nd. On November 6th, at her first Prime Minister's question time in the House of Commons, she immediately criticized Prime Minister Keir Starmer and his Labour Party government of being hostile to U.S. President-elect Donald Trump.
As leader of His Majesty's opposition, I will be taking a different approach to the last opposition by being a constructive opposition. And so I would like to start by congratulating President-elect Trump on his impressive victory this morning. the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary met him in September. Did the Foreign Secretary take that opportunity to apologise for making derogatory and scatological references, including, and I quote, "Trump is not only a woman-hating, neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath, he is also a profound threat to the international order"? And if he did not apologise, will the Prime Minister do so now on his behalf?
Joining us now from London is C-SPAN's Westminster producer, Peter Knowles. Thanks for being on Washington Today. Kemi Badenoch, new leader of the Conservative Party, what should U.S. listeners know about her, her politics, and her policies?
She's a very interesting choice. She's outspoken, sometimes to the point of being quite aggressive, obviously intelligent and thoughtful in what she says, and the members just of the Conservative Party fell in love with her. She was the members' favourite right from the start when we knew there would need to be another new leader. And she was always the one to beat. They loved her outspokenness, her criticism, her attacks on critical race theory, on the failure to integrate migrants, on trans and all the identity issues. And she's been very outspoken on all of those things. So the members' favourite. So the election, the leadership contest was really about the MPs working out whether they wanted to allow her to go forward as one of the two candidates for the members to choose between, because it always seemed pretty close to a certainty that the members would choose her. She's interesting because of her personal story, because though she was born in the United Kingdom, she then grew up, all of her upbringing was in Lagos, in Nigeria. Her parents are Nigerian. And she came to the UK at the age of 16 and had quite a difficult time, at least at first. And so she's got a really interesting outsiderish perspective on our politics. But she goes down a storm with the Conservative faithful.
What does it say that she immediately defended Donald Trump in such a high-profile way?
Well, very interesting that she did that, and probably not what Rishi Sunak would have done. Not to that extent, not so fiercely. So there's several things going on there, I think. One of them is that she knows that Labour are incredibly uncomfortable talking about President-elect Trump. The current Foreign Secretary in London is somebody, David Lammy, somebody who's been incredibly rude about former President Trump when he was in opposition and when he didn't imagine that Donald Trump could ever be re-elected. So that's a point of genuine embarrassment for the new UK government. So they're punching the bruise on that point, because the more Keir Starmer has to say nice things about the president-elect, the more uncomfortable it is within his own party, because there are very few in his own party who have much time for Donald Trump. So it's exploiting that weakness in Labour, that discomfort. So that's certainly one thing. I was talking to Kemi Badenoch's people last night, and they were saying, well, what she's also doing is she's really wanting to emphasise the importance of trade, because that's her background in government, and the goal of a free trade agreement, which never got anywhere in the present administration, and the fear of tariffs, that a tariff war would be a disaster for growth around the world. So that was something that she was wanting to get to. But I wonder if there's something else going on, and it's at least thinking about what kind of Conservative Party is she going to lead, and how to get away from statism that she perceives the problem with the party under Rishi Sunak, and whether she can take the party at all in the direction, and the country eventually, in the direction of a more overtly patriotic, aggressively patriotic even, style that is identified with Donald Trump. And this is interesting because there are very few political fans of of Mr. Trump in the UK. Very few. There is Nigel Farage. He's one. There aren't so many others. They're really not. But there is now a degree of interest in and intrigue. Well, how is he so successful? Well, what is it that he's doing and saying that works? And this is, of course, interesting to a party that's just done, the Conservative Party, really badly in a general election and gone down to their worst defeat in a very long time. So they are thinking about, well, what is it from this that we can learn, even if we don't have to take on all of the characteristics of a Donald Trump.
We're talking with C-SPAN's Westminster producer Peter Knowles from London. So now 2 British Conservative Party leaders in a row, people of color. Anything to read into that?
It's really interesting that this is they've been chosen by the party that is styled the Conservative Party. Labour, which talks a lot about identity and opportunity and race, has only had white males leading the party in power and in opposition. I think it says something about the Conservative Party and its interest in opportunity and getting on, and that style of approach. And I think it says something quite positive about the UK, that it is a remarkably open society where these things aren't just possible, but aren't particularly remarked upon. I mean, there's not been a huge amount of discussion of this, that these were the 2 people in a row who the Conservative Party thought were simply the best people they could choose at that point to lead them. So it's taken, and the leader of the third party, Ed Davey, did make this point in the Commons, how proud he was that this country had been able to make this kind of choice as a leader. So, I think it probably does say something about the openness of UK society in the present day.
And finally, she said her mission is to regain the majority, bring Conservatives back to government. That's obvious, but it's going to take a little while. What's the road ahead?
It's a very difficult road for an opposition party, and they start with a huge disadvantage. So they're way behind in the seats. But what we have seen is much greater volatility in elections, and Labour's majority is enormous in terms of number of seats, but it is not enormous in terms of percentage of the vote. And as they try and change the basics of the economy and pay back some of the debt burden, but also spend more on the health service, then that means more taxes, as that's not a particularly popular point of view. So already Labour has lost a lot of its shine in passing a budget which puts up a number of taxes as pretty much the first thing they've done in their time. So one thing that Kenny Bednock did talk about is she said we need to be honest about where we, the Conservative Party, went wrong and what we did wrong. Well, that's a very noble sentiment. It's quite a hard thing to do, because as soon as you start being honest about the mistakes you made, then people, your opponents are listening also, not just your supporters. So what was interesting for me is watching Prime Minister's questions, having said that almost the starting point is to be honest about the mistakes they made. There was no hint of what any of those mistakes might have been in her discourse with Keir Starmer. It was all attack, attack, attack.
C-SPAN's Westminster producer Peter Knowles joining us from London. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the independent newspaper in Great Britain reports that Kemi Badenoch has cut into Sir Keir Starmer's poll lead in her first week as Conservative Party leader, closing the gap by 2 points. The Techni UK Weekly Tracker poll for The Independent has revealed in the week since she took over from Rishi Sunak, Ms. Badenoch has increased the Conservative support by 1 point to 25%, while Labour has fallen a point to 29%, reducing the gap from 6 points to 4. That from The Independent. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.